Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all well. My name is Eileen Healy, and my job this morning is to host our enterprise or extended enterprise risk management TPRM Global Survey 2020 webinar. So I know that people are still joining. I can see people are still joining, but in the interest of time and in the interest to be fair to those who have joined on time, we will kick off and people can join in as we progress through the slides. So we might move on the slide there, Nigel, please. So I suppose this morning we want to take you through the outcome of our Global 2020 TPRM survey. It sets out, we're going to set a number of trends and key themes that are coming out of that survey. And we have a number of Deloitte panelists whom I'll introduce momentarily to you to talk us through that. So the global survey has been going for 5 years. This is the first year that the Irish firm has participated in the survey or have asked some of their clients to participate in the survey, and we'll talk to that in a moment. It's also the first year that we've decided to host a webinar to explain the outcome of the survey, and I suppose that is possibly a symptom of COVID because we're getting more used to webinars, but it's also possibly a symptom of the fact that we can see in the marketplace there's a greater ask for insight into third-party risk management, for services in relation to third-party risk management, and indeed support for establishing third-party risk management functions and maturing those functions in 2020 and beyond. So I suppose in response to that, we're hosting this webinar this morning. I would say the webinar this morning is sector agnostic. So, you know, and I'll explain in a moment the various sectors that were covered in the survey participants. We do plan to have roundtables subsequent to this that are sector specific. Obviously, subsectors are covered by regulation in relation to TPRM. Some sectors are really doing it because of a strong business imperative to do so. But it is good to have sector-specific roundtables in the future, and we will, but this morning is sector agnostic. In terms of the panelists this morning, I am delighted that Laura Wadding, who's a partner in Risk Advisory, is co-hosting with me this morning. And Laura at the end will do the facilitate some Q&A and do the wrap up. Christian Park, who is our global leader in extended enterprise risk management, is with us this morning. Christian operates out of our London office, and we've worked with him for many years, and we're delighted that he's here this morning to talk us through the key observations from the survey report, the key outcome, the key trends. So that's really good. So thanks, Christian, for joining us this morning. Christian will then be followed after he does the key findings. Kieran Tracy, a director in our risk advisory practice here, together with James Crowley and Darren Byrne, both senior managers, will go through detail on some of those key trends and observations, and that'll take us then into the Q&A with Laura. Please submit questions through the Q&A box. We can then weave those questions into the various presentations and speakers during the course of the presentation, or we can hold them to the end, whichever is more appropriate. But don't be shy about using the Q&A box to submit your questions. You should be able to see it there on your own panels on the webinar. So maybe just to move to the next slide, please, Nigel. So just in terms of the survey itself, so the survey was a global survey across 20 countries. Had over 1,100 participants, and you can see since 2016, so it's been running 5 years, you know, it has grown, the number of participants has grown 6 or 7 fold, which is, you know, no surprise given that, you know, third-party risk management and extended enterprise is really a hot topic for boards and for C-suite and senior management. So their desire to respond to this type of survey talks to that quite clearly. In terms of the sectors, as I mentioned, there's a mix of sectors. We have the consumer sector there, being the highest, and then that's followed by energy resources and industry and FS. So no surprise that probably they're sitting at the top of the grid on the first chart there. On the second chart there, you can see that the respondents predominantly were drawn from C-suite and senior management, as well as head of function. So again, no surprise there that that's who's responding to the survey, given the profile that third-party risk management has across many organisations that we will be dealing with. So if we just flick to the next slide, please, Nigel. So in terms of the Irish survey, or the Irish participants, obviously they were included within the 1,145 in the global. So we had 70 odd respondents, which was very good for the first year of our participation in that survey. And the mix of was slightly different, I suppose, in that financial services stood out in the top. We had 30% there drawn from financial services, 19 from insurance, and 13 for public sector, with the other sectors represented, but to a lesser extent, and the mix being slightly different in terms of the sectors. However, in terms of who was responding from those organisations, the same mix. Again, it was predominantly C-suite and senior management that were responding. And obviously the size of the organisations there is reflective of the market that we're in. So I suppose with that, what I might do, having given you that brief overview, I'm sure Christian will add to the overview I've given of the survey, him having led it for the past 5 years. Christian, maybe if we go to the next slide, you might lead us out on the key trends and observations, and then pass over here on Tracy after you to start into the details sections. Okay? Thanks, Christian.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Very nice to be here talking to you. So, as Eileen mentioned, I'm Christian Park. I look after our global external enterprise and third-party risk practice here at Deloitte. And as Eileen also mentioned, we've been running this survey for 5 years. And what's significant, I think, when you look at the results and you look at the global results, you saw 2 slides ago the number of participants that has significantly gone up over the last 5 years. So I think it was 147 in 2016 to just over 1,140, if I recall correctly, in 2020. And I think that just goes to show the vast amount of importance people are placing on this topic, and it's no longer a nice to have, it's almost a must have. It's very much on the board agenda, and I think the 2020 survey results show that. And I'll quickly run through this, but I know my co-panelists will go into quite a bit more detail when in each one of these buckets. So if I start with the top right on balancing responsibility and cost, this year we asked the question, so what are your key drivers? Why are you doing this? Why are you interested in third-party risk management? And typically we've had, well, we've got to comply with regulations, we're trying to manage the downside risk, there's some upside risk in terms of efficiency gain. But really this year, and I should say that the survey was conducted in November 2019 to January 2020, so before COVID. Although you'll see that as I talk through these themes, I'll just interject some additional COVID thoughts, because whilst the survey doesn't necessarily change, the results don't change, there is a different emphasis as a result of the pandemic we find ourselves in. But when we looked at the results, the key driver, one of the new key drivers that we saw was people wanting to be a responsible business. And I think for most people that was, let's manage our carbon footprint, let's manage plastic waste, let's manage a whole bunch of labor rights, etc. So let's get that right. The only I guess tension between that driver was the real focus on cost, and how do we manage costs, how do we keep it down. And the COVID overlay, since we ran the survey, there's two there. One is that responsible business is still there. People do want to be responsible, but there's also, we've seen a real focus on moving supply chain operations closer to home, and if they can, moving them in country, which again has caused a bit of tension between that cost element. So how do I get my cost down? How do I then manufacture closer to home? Or have my supply chain closer to home, but then also how do I become more responsible? So there's a whole host of things happening here within the survey, and you'll see as we go into the detail, the results come out. Around regulatory activity, by the way, as I go through, if you have any questions, I think there's a Q&A box. You can add any questions. I'm happy to take any of them now or later. But the second one around increasing regulatory activity, This we always used to be the domain of the financial services. So the financial services had a huge amount of regulation, the industry regulation, particularly around outsourcing, and then the other industries had regulation in specific what we would call risk areas. So in anti-bribery and corruption, in some health and safety perspective, et cetera, et cetera. What we found is that we're beginning to see that the regulators, both in financial services and outside, are beginning to talk to each other, and there's a general coalescence around, okay, we need to be more focused on making sure people are doing the right thing. And so we're seeing fines go up, we're seeing audits go up, we're seeing reach through of the regulators increase. Probably none of that is a surprise to you, but in the survey, that's one of the areas people are very focused on. So it's more traditional in nature in terms of people wanting to manage a downside risk. But it's certainly a key driver and something that people are very keen to address and make sure that they're compliant with. The third bullet, and we've spoken about this for a number of years around vision for transformation, but we're beginning to see that, yes, people have understood that they needed to do third-party risk management, but they may not have understood exactly what that meant. So we've seen traditionally people operating in silos. Okay, I've got the cyber, I've got the chief information security officer. He needs to manage information security risk. I'm therefore going to go and build out an information security program that looks at my third parties and what they're doing with my data. Then on the other side of the organization, I've got somebody in health and safety looking to do the same thing, and somebody else looking to do it for anti-bribery and corruption, and so on and so forth. The vision for transformation now, because the board is becoming much more in tune with, this is not risk domain by risk domain, this is very much, let's get all of the risks on the table, help me understand where my suppliers are, where my distributors are, where my agents are. Help me understand that, and then help me understand the risk profile. And I want to know that all in a dashboard, and I need you to be able to provide me updates on a regular, almost instantaneous basis. So the vision for transformation is very much, well, how do we get to that holistic view? How do we integrate technology? How do we integrate data feeds? How do we get into a proactive view as to what's going to be coming down the line, and not really focus on this reactive view, which is what we've had perhaps for the last, or certainly in the late 2015, 2016, 2017, we're beginning to see that more proactive, predictive analytics view, the dashboarding, geospatial capability. People want all of that, and that vision for transformation is coming really loudly in this year's survey, which is good to see, but obviously is a bit more costly and a bit more difficult to achieve. But then coupled with that, leveraging external assistance. So we're not just going to build shared service centers for people to do this. We're not going to try and reinvent the wheel and design our own analytics and robotics and technology, etc. So there's a whole ethos now that if it's been built before, then leverage it. And if there are people who are experts in this field, leverage them, both from a design, but also from a delivery perspective. So we've seen that there's a lot of community models present in the market at the moment. There's a lot of people purporting to use blockchain and bringing that to the fore. It's not quite there yet, but just to show you that that's happening, and that leveraging of external assistance is very much on the up. The wider focus, this is really around, we talk about risk, we talk about understanding where that's present in the supply chain, but we're beginning to see, and we've seen it for a couple of years now, but we're beginning to see people actually achieve this, moving away from risk, but integrated to what we call third-party management, lose the risk, and just talk about third-party management. So that's performance management, that's contract management, that's financial management, it's risk management, it's sourcing, potentially all on one platform, potentially all data aggregated and one holistic dashboard. And I think that is, I've got probably about 10 or so survey respondents doing that at the moment. They're big projects and big programs, but once they come out the back end of it, it'll be pretty well integrated, and it's very much a data management exercise as much as it is a visualization and technology exercise as well. And then the final bit around cost of failure, which is the first slides that you'll see when I hand over to Kieran in a second. The cost of failure has increased dramatically. So by that we mean if a third party fails in your supply chain, and that doesn't need to be a supplier, it could be anywhere down that supply chain, it could be a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh party, we're beginning to see that the cost to the business of that happening has increased dramatically, 10, 20, 30-fold. You'll see the results in a second. And I think that's really important, because a lot of people and a lot of our clients ask, so what's the business case? Why are we doing this? And of course, all of these circles, all of these points point to that. But it's also very much, okay, the cost of failure, if we can avoid that, we save the company significant P&L impact, which in turn funds what we need to do, which in turn drives efficiency. And something that we released in 2015, the 2 to 3% shareholder value was, if you can get this right, you will increase your shareholder value returns. And I think that's an important point here. That's it. That's my summary. I'll hand over to Kieran now, but I'm happy to take any questions later on in the call.
Thank you, Christian. I hope everybody can hear me okay. My name is, as Christian has identified, my name is Kieran Tracy, and I'm a director here on operational risk in Deloitte. And I'm going to talk to you about two of the 6 key themes that arose from our 2020 survey. Firstly, the cost of failure, which Christian has done a great job introducing, and I'm sure which is something that's going to be very close to everybody's hearts here as we manage risk, as we try to mitigate cost impacts, and as we look to operating our third-party ecosystem in a post-COVID world in an efficient and effective manner. I also want to talk to you a little bit about balancing responsibility and cost, which is that kind of classic dilemma of your responsibility and the cost of meeting your objectives and your responsibilities to your stakeholders. So just to move on to the next slide. There is no doubt that the financial impact of a failure has significantly increased, where we have almost half our respondents globally, 46%, saying that the impact of a failure by a third party or a subcontractor has at least doubled since 2015. And 1 in 5 believe the financial impact has multiplied tenfold. So pretty big numbers, with also further impacts potentially on your shareholders and share prices, which can have a significant detrimental effect to your business. Interestingly, for 14% of Irish respondents estimated the financial exposure of a major third-party incident at in excess of $1 billion. That's an eye-watering number in the Irish corporate context. I might just point out as we go through the slides that we do present the global and the Irish numbers on each one of these slides. Typically, the Irish numbers are in blue font and the global numbers in green, or on a global on the left and Irish on the right scenario, so we can take it through those as we progress. So just to jump on to the next slide, if you could please. Also, one of the key pieces that came out of the survey in terms of risk incidents was that virtually all respondents had experienced a third-party risk incident in the last 3 years. So 84% globally and 92% of Irish respondents had experienced these in the last 3 years. When we kind of drill into those a little bit and try to figure out the extent of high-impact third-party incidents, what we found was that 17% of global organizations had experienced a high-impact third-party incident in the past 3 years, which is almost 1 in 5. Whereas last year in 2019, that was 11%, which is 1 in 10. So the volume of high impact third party events has increased kind of dramatically since 2019. And bearing in mind, this was pre-COVID. So I would imagine that the 2021 figures might indeed have an even greater level of high impact third party events. So I might just go to the next slide, please. So in terms of cost of failure and impact of COVID, as Christian mentioned, we do have some commentary on how COVID may have impacted cost of failure. And there is no doubt that COVID has reinforced the need to invest in risk management strategies, in good governance and sustainability and resilience practices for third parties. We also believe that risk management, good, sound, effective risk management capabilities provide competitive advantage to organizations. This is this theme of risk powering performance. And such capabilities can ensure better outcomes for your business. We are definitely practitioners and we have a firm belief in that view. In addition to high impact incidents, we also expect there to be an increased volume of lower impact incidents and medium impact incidents for our businesses, which will require ongoing effective risk management practices and third-party risk management practices for your business on a very regular basis. Organizations, we believe, will also strengthen and increase consequence management, which will have where third-party incidents and breaches arise, which may affect executive leadership and members of the board. So just moving on to the next section, which talks about balancing responsibility and cost. So I just want to talk about this section for a little bit, and if you jump to the results on the next page. So the top level result is that came out. One of the top results that came out of the 2020 survey was where we saw the desire for an organization to be a responsible business really coming up the charts to be one of the main drivers of investment in EERM this year. Globally, 43% believe this to be one of their top priorities in investment in EERM, 36% in the Irish context. And that really does kind of is probably driven by kind of global sustainability, climate, equality, workforce issues that have for the past while been come to the fore in the marketplace. Also, in the Irish context, it's worth pointing out that some of the main drivers include regulatory requirements and scrutiny, which may reflect the dynamics of businesses in the Irish context, particularly where there's financial services, life sciences, regulated businesses. Interestingly, from an Irish perspective also, we did outperform in terms of our top drivers for EERM investment. The global survey, 45% in the Irish context versus 39% globally in terms of cost reduction. So there does seem to be an appetite in the Irish marketplace, certainly for cost reduction strategies. We'll talk a little bit more about those later on in terms of cost and revenue recovery and efficiency approaches. So just to move on to the next. So one of the things we did find, although organizations do have an objective to invest in their EERM framework in order to become a more sustainable and responsible business, what we did find was that in terms of areas that were identified as being underinvestment, we found that these included climate risk, environmental risk, labour and modern slavery, and health and safety. So what that tells us to a certain extent is that although our objectives are heading in the right direction in terms of responsible business, actually where we're putting our investments afterwards probably don't align to that. Globally, we also see that there are underinvestments around financial crime, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery and corruption, and data privacy, but those don't correspond in the Irish context. So Irish respondents did seem to be confident that we were adequately investing in a number of those areas, although there was room for improvement. So the next slide talks a little bit about where we actually see our investments in EERM going. And I tend to call these the old reliables. So we do see prioritized investment in areas such as information security, cyber risk, and data privacy. And that's probably not surprising when you took a look at some of the figures here in the center, which talk about where the greatest extent of third-party risks reside, and they include InfoSec, cyber risk, and ABAC. So, and also on the third piece where we talk about where the actual incidents arose. So the greatest number of incidents arose in the cyber risk domain, followed by anti-bribery and corruption and information security. So in this scenario here, what we are seeing is that where the most amount of investment is invested in the risk domains where we do view the greatest amount of risks and where we do tend to see the greatest number of incidents. So just jumping to the next slide. Okay. So one of the key themes that did come out was the absence of adequate investment in operational resilience for third parties, business resilience, and continuity. I think this is something that would have changed in the 6 months since the survey was completed, where organizations will certainly be more considerate of third-party business resilience and continuity. Interestingly, we also believe, in the Irish context, we believe that we are underinvestment in geopolitical risk domain, which is probably a factor in how we are related to the UK's Brexit scenario and the openness of our economy. I want to just move to the next slide, please. Also, cost remains, another trend is that cost remains a significant consideration impacting organizations in EERM. So the first two quadrants here talk about the fact that respondents typically believe that we are underinvestment. Globally, more than half, almost 2/3 of respondents believe we are underinvestment and didn't have enough budget set aside for EERM. The third quadrant talks a little bit about the fact that the majority of global respondents and about 1/3 of Irish respondents believe that internal independent reviews of third-party risks didn't hit the mark or were inadequate. Now, these would typically be performed by your internal audit function. So that question probably for me is that does the internal audit function or those performing the review have the necessary skill set and capabilities to perform those reviews? Also, more than half, with 52% in the Irish context and 62% globally, think that ongoing monitoring of third parties is inadequate. So I think what this slide here tells us is that globally, the trend is that we believe that the investment in EERM is underinvested. We don't have adequate independent reviews, and that monitoring of third parties is also inadequate. So there's a lot of room for improvement in our approaches to managing third parties, both globally and in the Irish context. Just moving on to the next slide. So we mentioned already the cost and revenue recovery strategies. So there is an important motivation for EERM in terms of cost reduction and efficiencies, and 85% of Irish respondents believe that such efficiencies could come from shared services in EERM or things like centres of excellence. So that's a pretty big number. So what that tells us is that Irish respondents do not believe that we're very good currently at managing our EERM strategies very efficiently. There's also a view, both globally at 41% of respondents and 35% in the Irish context, that cost and revenue recovery initiatives can protect margins. Aligned to that, what we do see also is that 64% of global respondents and a similar number of Irish respondents believed that we didn't have CRR initiatives that were aligned to EERM programs or were unaware of those. And a big number of Irish respondents, 71%, want to perform more cost and revenue recovery initiatives in the near future, which demonstrates an appetite for increasing investment in this area, protect margins, and become a more efficient business. Just go to the next slide, please. So I'll just wrap up on this slide here and talk a little bit about Covert Impacts on balancing responsibility and cost. So desire to be seen as a responsible business will feature more regularly in all considerations around investment in EERM. I think this would be driven even further by COVID and an increased awareness among our communities that we do actually have a negative impact on the environment, and we don't want to be seen as a type of business that does not take care of our environment. We also see, just the second and last bullet point, we talk about growing customer activism and also stakeholder and shareholder activism, which will drive investments and strategies around investments. We think that COVID-19 also will increase and widen organizational business continuity and resilience initiatives across the third-party ecosystem. And our organizations will consider implications of third-party actions at the time of addressing global issues around sustainability, supply chain, ethical products. Also, we believe that organizational leaders will increasingly recognize the role of cost and revenue recovery, particularly in the Irish context, where we saw 71% of respondents believing that this was a good thing to do, indicating that they had not invested significantly in this to date. So I thank you with that. If you do have questions, you can post them, and I'll pass you now to Darren Byrne, who will take us through the next two key themes of our 2020 survey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kieran. As we move in, sorry, just to confirm, my name is Darren Byrne. I'm a Senior Manager in Risk Advisory, focusing on operational risk and third-party risk management. The two themes that I'm going to cover now are increasing regulatory activity and vision for transformation. If we move on to the next slide. I suppose from a regulatory perspective, there's going to be no surprises to see that the regulatory landscape, due to increased pressures and scrutiny, continue to be key drivers for investing in EERM across organisations. And we'll see that from a global perspective, almost half of the respondents agreed with that. And likewise, from an Irish perspective, we see that 2/3 of the respondents are in the same view, that the regulatory pressures are kind of a key driver to investment in EERM. Two areas of increasing influence from a regulatory perspective that we've seen through this is, the first one is around the broadening remit of emerging risks, and it aligns very much to Kieran's piece around the balancing responsibility. There's definitely more focus from the regulator around things like climate risk, modern slavery and labour laws, and then the more traditional side of things, and particularly with Covert impacts, we're seeing more things around operational resilience, cloud outsourcing, particularly in a digital world, and data privacy. So increased focus around that. And then the other piece from an influencing factor from the regulator is the fact that there's a wider remit to impose their power beyond national borders. If we move on to the next slide. When we look at the top areas requiring focus and improvement as identified by our respondents, you'll note a similar kind of percentage of respondents focusing on the same 3 areas, all of which support ongoing monitoring and oversight of third parties. And all 3 areas that are coming through, or the key 3 themes, are all very much interconnected. So we see the first one there is around real-time information, risk metrics and reporting. And that's very much interconnected to the next one around tools and technology, because ultimately by leveraging kind of those kind of tools and technology, you would hope to get the kind of the good MI and real-time information and reporting, which ultimately then will help support the third item of focus and improvement, which is around governance and the holistic oversight of third parties by leadership. If we move on to the next slide then. Probably no surprise as well, particularly we've seen the area of subcontractors as a key challenge that's been reinforced by the COVID crisis in the past 6 months. Definitely, we've speaking to many clients, they've confirmed that although they had good visibility of kind of their third parties, and particularly their critical third parties, where they found that they had kind of a shortfall was visibility around the subcontractors, or what known as the 4th or 5th parties. I guess that's been reinforced by this particular survey. And again, this is pre-COVID, so I'd expect these figures to actually probably be higher in a post-COVID world. But ultimately, we see that 20% from a global perspective and 23% of respondents say that they can effectively monitor either or all, or even just more critical subcontractors. If we look at kind of the different data sets relating to the subcontractor piece, there's definitely appears to be an ad hoc approach across the respondents in terms of how their organizations monitor and manage subcontractors. If we look to the left-hand side, from a global perspective, there's almost a quarter of the respondents said that they don't monitor subcontractors at all, even through third parties. And thankfully, from an Irish perspective, that figure is a lot lower. We see it down at 8%. Another area which seems to be consistent across the global and Irish landscape is around kind of the reliance on third parties to manage those subcontractor relationships. But I guess the key to this is definitely, as we move forward, is to try and get that visibility of our subcontractors, whether it be directly through your third parties or even having a role to play directly with those subcontractors. If we move on to the next slide. So just in terms of COVID commentary and predictions in relation to increasing regulatory activity, definitely we're seeing the regulatory interventions will continue to increase in a post-COVID world. The optimum state of EERM will continue to be a moving target for many organizations. Concepts of good practice, technology solutions, utilities, and managed services will continue to evolve, and consequently, organizations will need to reevaluate their earlier self-assessments of maturity at periodic intervals. Definitely, COVID will compel organizations to better understand their critical subcontractor dependencies. As I say, definitely we've heard many a story as COVID has impacted organizations that lack of visibility has led to operational disruptions for particular organizations due to that kind of lack of visibility around critical subcontractor dependencies. And then insourcing will emerge as a more attractive option where the immediate need is to maintain direct control over critical operations and processes while invoking contingency plans. But ultimately, albeit that insourcing, you still need to focus on that the monitoring and oversight of your insourced arrangements as well as your external third parties. If we move on to the vision for transformation, and the next slide there, what we see is organizations desire a single technology solution to enable centralized source of information supporting real-time monitoring and decision making. If we look at some of the data here, in terms of organization satisfaction of their existing EERM technology, we see that from a global perspective, 24% were dissatisfied with their EERM technology versus 13% from an Irish perspective. Partly dissatisfied, we're seeing almost half the respondents from a global perspective saying that they're partly dissatisfied with their EERM technology versus 34% from an Irish perspective. And then in terms of being satisfied with their EERM technology solutions, 28% from a global perspective and 36% from an Irish perspective. I suppose one of the key areas of concern and driving the dissatisfaction around EERM technology from our respondents appears to be around the fact that there doesn't appear to be seamless integration capabilities between the different technologies. If we move on to the next slide then, I suppose although kind of respondents are desiring a single technology solution, there is kind of a consensus that there isn't a one technology fits all that's going to meet all the growing list of stakeholder requirements across an organization. So the vast majority of respondents have confirmed that they leverage a number of different technologies in an attempt to address all their stakeholder requirements from an EERM perspective. What does this look like? I suppose what we've seen here is a tiered approach where we see that 89% of our respondents have said that they have implemented what we've seen as a tier 1 system, an ERP or a backbone system, as an example, a procurement platform acting as the foundation for EERM activities. These are then supported by tier 2, which we're seeing 66% of our respondents saying that they've also implemented a tier 2 risk management platform to support your tier 1 kind of EERM systems. The tier 2 tends to be kind of focused around your GRC, traditional GRC solutions, managing diverse risk management requirements, focusing on different domains. And then the tier 3, which we've also seen a very high response in terms of implementation of other niche packages for specific EERM processes or risks, such as AML as an example, and providing feeds from specialized risk domains. There's also a high percentage there in terms of implementing those particular systems. But all in all, I suppose what we're seeing is there's definitely a challenge around the integration of all these systems and getting the most optimal and effective MI and real-time information from these systems. If we move forward to the next slide, In terms of the commentary and predictions for vision for transformation, we expect continued investment in tech-enabled transformation initiatives. We don't see a standout technology solution that has differentiated itself as the go-to solution for third-party risk management, and therefore we're probably going to see a lot more change in terms of an advancement in terms of technology as times move on, in terms of trying to address key stakeholder requirements across organizations to find that one solution that will fit all those requirements. COVID has enhanced the desire for actionable intelligence in the boardroom, enabled by better visualization of data, online alerts to enable action and make top-level reporting more succinct and smarter. And then likewise, organizations are more likely to step up their investment in robotics and AI to make strategic decisions more timely. And to fuel this, organizations will increasingly need to incorporate a data workstream that considers data sources, integrity, and storage. I'll hand you over now to Jimmy, who'll cover the final two themes.
Jimmy, it's Eileen here. Just to remind everybody that we've only 20 minutes left, so we have a good few questions to get through as well. So if you could wrap it at 10 to, please.
Okay, thanks, Eileen. Okay, good morning, folks. My name is Jimmy Crowley. I'm Senior Manager in Risk Advisory, specialising in operational audit and in third-party risk management. So if we just move on here, so the area we're looking at now is around leveraging external assistance. So I suppose in team to what the guys have said before, really what we're seeing, I suppose, basically on this slide is that our clients and the respondents to the survey are actually, moving towards using either centres of excellence or shared services centres to actually, manage third-party risks, which ties in with what the earlier participants were saying, like about, moving away from the silos and moving into a scenario whereby you're managing the contract as opposed to managing the risk, and you're getting an organizational wide view. There is a prevalence and there's a movement towards, an increased movement towards actually bringing in outsourced help to actually do this, given the complexity of third-party risks and the complexity of the third-party ecosystem itself. So what we're seeing here, if you look at the right-hand table, is interesting. Irish respondents tend to be ahead in terms of their global peers in terms of actually either partially or fully outsourcing the centres of excellence and the shared services centres. So if we just move on there again to the next slide, this will give you a flavour of some of the sort of areas in which people are actually outsourcing. So people are using stuff like using external managed shared services providers. So 32% of Irish respondents are doing that. 29% of Irish respondents intend to do so in the future. And then they talk about 12% of Irish respondents are moving towards supplement of available in-house resources with external assistance. So if we move on there again to the next slide, I suppose in summary, what we're saying is that it is a complex environment, and there is a movement towards making use of external resources to help drive oversight of third parties. While it might be advantageous in the short term for critical functions to actually maintain this in-house, it would be judicious in the future to actually move towards using external resources that are available, and that those technology-based service models could actually, reduce the EERM capital costs in the future. So that's the end of that section. So we'll just move on quickly to the final section there, which is around the wider focus. So I suppose the key thing here, two key things I suppose to remember, if you go back to what Christian was saying at the very start about movement from just merely managing the risk in terms of towards actually moving managing the actual contract itself. So in terms of how are third parties performing, what's their financial performance like, are they complying with the terms and conditions of the contract? And if you remember, Kieran was speaking about, I think it was 91% of Irish respondents, sorry, 92% of Irish respondents had experienced a third-party incident in the last 3 years, and that 11% of them indicated that the cost of this could be over $1 billion. So really what we're seeing is that this is actually driving the responsibility and the oversight of this to the very top of organizations. So, it's moving towards the CEOs and boards, and this is what we're typically seeing coming out in the responses to these questions. So if we move on to the next slide there. Like typically what we're seeing here is that if you look on the left, what it's indicating is that, you know, in 32% globally, 30% nationally, in Ireland, sorry, that the ultimate accountability rests with the CEO. And below that, then you'll see that in 22% globally and 15% in Ireland, the ultimate responsibility is actually with the board. And these are both moving up, and they've continued to move up in the past years. Conversely, then, if you look on the far side, you'll see that responsibility seems to be coming down from where it would have traditionally sat with people like, you know, chief risk officer, chief financial officer, or procurement officers. So if we move on to the next slide there again, please. Yeah, so Darren had spoke before about, you know, the desire to get technology one size, and, you know, there isn't a one size fits all. There is, I suppose, and this is really critical, I suppose, at the moment, you know, in terms of there's a drive towards using emerging technologies in order to get what we call actionable intelligence. Really, you know, what this means is, you know, actual lifetime monitoring. You know, and if you look at the right-hand side, one of the key priorities for 35% globally and 47% nationally of respondents is to actually, you know, to enhance the monitoring of third parties by using these emerging technologies. So what we're talking about there is real-time monitoring and risk sensing to provide actionable intelligence. And 58% of Irish respondents then indicated that their highest priority is to develop better in-house coordination with risk domain owners, business unit leaders, functional leaders, legal teams, internal audit, etc. And that's all reflective of the fact that we said that the responsibility is moving up. So if we move up there again. Yeah, so basically, I suppose critically what we're saying here is that, you know, look, in the longer term, this is actually advantageous. It is happening, and we see it continuing to happen. You know, there is going to be a challenge, I suppose, in terms of, you know, coordinating all this and making sure that, you know, nothing is lost as this drive for an organization-wide view of third-party risk management actually goes on. So if we move on to the next slide there. So finally, I suppose, look, what we're predicting here, I mean, is that, you know, we predict that a strategic and broader view of third-party risk management will continue in years to come, and it's driven by the executive leadership. And again, I go back to that figure, you know, the 92% that experienced an incident, and the actual cost of an incident were 11% of the Irish respondents that it would cost more than $1 billion. And this will drive, you know, the ultimate accountability will travel to the very top of the organization, which is reflective of those two figures that I just re-emphasized there again. So with that in mind, look, I'll hand over to Laura Wadding to wrap up, and then we'll take any questions that people have.
Thanks a lot, Jimmy. I tell you what we might do, actually, we might get all of the speakers to turn their cameras on, and we'll have a quick fire round of questions. Thanks to everybody for joining. I know we've had a full packed agenda this morning. Eileen opened the session. We've heard from Christian, we've heard from Kieran, from Darren, from Jimmy. And I get the pleasure of firing questions at people. We've had a few questions throughout the session. So and we're really lucky to be joined by Christian as a leader in our business on this area. But hopefully, Christian, I won't throw all the questions at you, but we do have some that I think you'll be interested in. So maybe it might be one actually for Christian and Eileen. Just like we talk a lot about the operational impacts of third-party risk management, and we talk a lot about IT and cyber and budgets and cost and all that. But when we think about ethical supply chain and a trend generally towards, you know, sustainability and ethics and culture and values, what is the trend towards ethical supply chain, and how is that materializing in third-party risk management? Maybe Christian.
Shall I kick off? It's a great question. So literally after this call, I'm talking to one of our clients on this very topic. So they want to integrate what they call the complete sustainability package. So they want to be talking about, they want to see health and safety in the workforce, which is very much a post-COVID environment where we're beginning to see clients make decisions around who they want to use based on how they're going to evidence that they're going to put their workforce first, make sure it's a safe and conducive working environment. So we're seeing that component of it. The carbon impact, carbon neutrality, we're beginning to see the climate change components come through, the responsible packaging initiatives around, if you're a manufacturer, what are you doing to reduce pollution and plastic waste? All of these different components are coming together, and the irony, well, not the irony, but the statement, the client that I'm talking to very shortly the way he's framing it, it's third-party risk management, but putting sustainability at the core. And I think that's going to be a real mindset shift as we go through the next couple of years. And I'll hand over to Eileen to add.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. I mean, I can definitely see, Laura, that while cyber and digital and all the risks that pertain to third parties in those areas remain really, really, really high on the agenda, there is no doubt that matters sustainability are really to the fore now. And I probably would say that matters relating to things like human rights, you know, modern slavery, and you know, things like child labour when you're sourcing for particular materials, you know, are very high on the agenda, because that's, you're getting into really, really dangerous territory there if the systems and processes aren't in play to do the due diligence on the third parties as part of the overall risk management programme. So I suppose this is an area that is sustainability, and that whole ethical supply chain is really an area that is fraught with, can be fraught with issue if the right processes aren't put in place. But I am seeing very much it's on the board's agenda, and if it's on the board's agenda, it's going to come filter down through the organisation.
Yeah, okay. It's a real reputational risk, isn't it, as well?
It's really, really, really important to get that right.
Okay, moving on to happier topics, COVID. And really, I suppose the question is, you know, what's been the impact of COVID on, you know, the third party risk management ecosystem, whether in a regulated environment or not? You know, what sort of impact has COVID had? What lessons are we learning from this? And you know, what do we see the direction of travel being as COVID continues to be part of our life? I don't know who might want to take that one.
I might just start on that and maybe handle on the side. From a COVID perspective, we've definitely, you know, highlighted for them that they probably knew were there, but they didn't those dependent to a geographical dependency on a geography, for example, China, or in relation to a supplier or a supplier located in a certain part of the globe. So I suppose I know with that in
your connection is pretty poor, Eileen.
Okay. Maybe I sort that out.
Okay. So somebody else want to jump in there? Christian, a view from COVID?
Yeah, I'll jump in and hand over to anybody else who's got some opinions. So we've seen some dramatic well, I guess movements in terms of the way people are looking at this. So in the first instance, and then bear in mind that I'm in the UK, and so February, March was a big couple of months for us in terms of what people were looking to do. But most of the clients who had a good third-party risk framework were the ones who were able to respond super quickly in terms of who are we doing business, where are they located, what's the pandemic doing in those instances, where's lockdown, where's schools being shut, you know, what's happening in the workforce, so that they could then be able to look at how the supply chain would need to be mobilized, switch over to other suppliers. So there was quite a bit. If you have the information, you could react really quickly. And so as a result, what we've seen is a lot of organizations have decided that this has been, and it's terrible to say it because the pandemic's been an awful experience for everybody, but at the same time, it's been a business case in why third-party risk management should be done effectively and quickly and efficiently. So we're beginning to see budgets come through now that were never available before to invest in this going forward, so that we can prevent and be ahead of the curve the next time. But I'll hand over to the other panelists as well.
I think from an Irish perspective, some of the Brexit planning where organisations might have been heavily reliant on the UK or getting access to supply through the UK did provide some resilience. But I think at the same time, we've seen a number of clients see this as a wake-up call, where they had international subsidiaries that were reliant on the Far East and have now decided that it's actually time to start taking a look at this and making sure that we do have continuity of supply. The pessimist in me thinks that although this is probably a once in 100-year pandemic, we probably are going to see more of these types of scenarios on a more frequent basis. We hope not, but I fear that we may.
Yeah, the likelihood is last year it was the snow. Or 2 years ago it was the snow. I think you're probably right, Kieran. You mentioned Brexit there, and a topic that's very close to my heart, and an industry that's very close to my heart is the investment management industry. Brexit is really shaking things up there. It's a heavily delegated sector, or heavily intermediated sector. There's lots of delegation. Most businesses operate some sort of delegate model, and the regulator here has said, you know, delegation is outsourcing effectively. Darren, I'm going to flip a question over to you, just in terms of whether or not we expect there to be increased regulation around delegation and outsourcing in the financial service sector, and in particular maybe the investment management sector. You're on mute.
We have, thanks, Laura. We've seen a lot of activity in that respect anyway from the regulator over the last couple of years, both from an EBA perspective, kind of European-wide, and then also from an Irish perspective. And definitely, you know, the expectation is that will move into regulation from an Irish perspective. I suppose what we're seeing kind of as sub areas of or hot topics related to kind of outsourcing or third-party risk management are things like cloud outsourcing and particularly with digitalization in organizations, and more regulation expected in that regards as well. And then also the topic of operational resilience, which I know Kieran touched on in his section, but definitely operational resilience is particularly in light of COVID, something that's become a hot topic. We've definitely seen movement in the UK in terms of consultation papers from the Bank of England, PRA and FCA on that topic. And more than likely the Irish regulator will follow suit in that respect as well. So yeah, I would say definitely from a financial service perspective, there's a lot to come.
I expect so too. I wonder, are there any questions from the attendees today? I haven't seen any in the last few minutes, but people should feel free to shoot through a question with the chat functionality if they want to do that. You mentioned cloud there, Darren. I wonder, does the panel have a view as to how firms are reorganizing their governance structures in order to be able to oversee their cloud providers where it's outsourced? It's a question I get asked quite a lot, actually. Does anyone have a view?
So I'll offer a view as to, I mean, it's the cloud question raises two questions. One is there's a concentration risk that people have suddenly found themselves exposed to, not just by their use of cloud providers, but the third parties and subcontractors use. So essentially, we're concentrating all our data in essentially 4 or 5 cloud providers around the world, and so that is causing people headaches. And then from a regulatory perspective, what does that actually mean? What are we doing about it? How are we getting access to it? We're seeing the cloud providers being relatively robust around who has access to seeing what they do with the data, how they control it. But we're finding that if you come in numbers and coalesce, then you do get access. So it's an interesting debate, and one that will rage on, I'm sure, for many years to come. But it's definitely a big topic.
Yeah, I know. Look, we're right up on the hour. I just want to say thanks to everybody from Deloitte who contributed today. I want to say thanks to everybody who attended. I think Eileen mentioned at the outset that we are going to have some sector-specific roundtables on this as we continue the discussion and debate around third-party risk management. As Christian said, the whole area is likely to be an area that will be well discussed and debated for many years to come. So thanks to everybody today, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.